The meaning and origin of the Talmud Jmmanuel in the Jewish Talmud. The meaning of the Talmud Jmmanuel can be explained as the teaching of Emmanuel. The term Talmud comes from the Hebrew language and means the learning, study, the science. Originally, it concerns a collection of rabbinical commentary on the Jewish faith. The Jewish Talmud, with which the Talmud Jmmanuel has no connection whatsoever, consists of two parts, the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Hebrews call the Pentateuch, compare with the Christian Bible, the written law, and the Talmud, the unwritten or oral law, which was recorded much later. The Jewish Talmud contains both the civil as well as the canonical rites, according to the canon exemplary, excellent, recognized of the Jews, to which they attach great holiness. According to Hebrew tradition, the Talmud is supposed to come from Moses, who is said to have passed it on only orally, which is not correct, however, according to the pure spirit level Erhat Athersada, whereas he is supposed to have held the Pentateuch in writing, which, according to Erhat Athersada, also is not true, because the whole thing was cobbled together by self-appointed prophets and by scribes very long after Moses. The so-called Jerusalemite Talmud was not completed until the beginning of the 4th century. In the 5th century, the so-called Babylonian Talmud then arose as the second editing of the Jerusalemite Talmud. Incidentally, Pope Leo X, whose name also plays a role in magic, let the Babylonian Talmud be printed around the year 1520. Literature, Dr. Eric Bischoff, Talmud Katechismus, Leipzig, 1904, Dr. S. Funk, Talmud Proben, Leipzig, 1912, as well as Die Einstehung des Talmuds, Berlin, 1919. Furthermore, R. Meier, Der Babylonische Talmud, Munich, 1963. Remarks on the writing style of Judas Iscariot. In reading the translation of the Talmud Jmmanuel, the quite special style in which Judas Iscariot wrote is immediately striking. For today's understanding of the German language, it seems almost exotically ancient, and indeed not only in the spelling and mode of expression, but also in the grammar and in the sentence structure. Compared with other old writings handed down, which were also translated into German, the Talmud Jmmanuel deviates from them very much, and it turns out that Judas Iscariot obviously had a completely individual mode of expression and also manner of speaking, comparable with nothing and no one, to which he also remained completely loyal in his written work. Correctly transferred into the German language, there arises an absolutely unique characteristic effect, which is completely consistent in itself and which can be found in no other translation or transferences of old writings. Precisely this absolutely peculiar and unique mode of expression, however, makes it possible to control the unity of expression in itself, which is a very strong proof for the fact that the manuscript was actually only written by a single person and that nothing has ever been added to this manuscript by other sources, and that it has not been expanded by other or later writers. Probably no other writer than Judas Iscariot would it have been possible, or could it be possible, to write completely unbroken with these word choices and in these sentence structures, without deviations and small or very small irregularities arising in mode of expression, spelling, grammar, and sentence structure, which would immediately catch the eye. This is also valid for his use of certain expressions evidently typical for him, which could not have been and cannot be imitated or faked or falsified without being immediately noticeable, because even in translations, such inconsistencies can be realized in the choice of words, in the expression, in spelling, in grammar, and in the sentence structure immediately and without a doubt. Precisely these specialnesses, however, turn out to be fundamental and not to be refuted evidence for the fact that the manuscript comes from one pen and is absolutely self-contained. Add to this the complete plausibility and logic of that which is explained, which seems especially authentic and unfalsified just by the specialnesses of the language. The emergence of the scroll records of Judas Iscariot. The scroll records that were produced with regard to Jmmanuel's teachings and life arose, on the one hand, through notes constantly made by Judas Iscariot, and also in part through parts of the teaching that were dictated by Jmmanuel, which Judas wrote down in the form of the scroll. However, the whole thing only corresponded to a small part of that which Jmmanuel taught, because Judas noted and wrote more about the work of Jmmanuel than about the actual teaching of the prophets, which Jmmanuel brought, taught, and advocated, and which was very extensive. No records about that were made by Judas Iscariot, because everything was too extensive and too detailed for him to have been able to accomplish the work of a complete record of the teaching. This was also clear to Jmmanuel, who also knew that he brought forth teaching of the prophets, that is, the teaching of truth, teaching of spirit, teaching of life, would be extensively written down and spread in the new time from 1844, which actually also happened and which is held in the extensive works Phalan Marato, as well as in the Goblet of the Truth. The two works mentioned correspond in an absolutely unfalsified manner and word for word to the actual teaching of the prophets, as was created by the universal prophet Nicodemian. Incorporated therein are also certain parts from the present time, which I myself, Billy Edward Albert Meier, Beam, have written as last proclaimer from the Nicodemian line, and which are recognizable as such. The teaching of the prophets, that is, the teaching of truth, teaching of spirit, teaching of life, does not only encompass the values that are contained in the and in the Goblet of the Truth, because the whole thing is much more extensive and put together in large parts in the so-called spiritual teaching, which contains a number of other textbooks, as well as a teaching course of many years. And you can go to the figu.org website and go to their shop, and you can find many of the books and writings that Billy has written over his lifetime if you want to read more about the spiritual teaching.